Welcome, everyone. We are in the early stages of Con Fiasco. If you've gone to any of the panels so far, you know it's a little bit chaotic, but we're getting things done. My name is Jay Viner. One of the things that is chaotic is that I have multiple cameras and neither one of them is working. So you don't get to see me today, but that's okay because I don't look great. It's very hot and sweaty here in Nebraska. So we're here. We have three lovely panelists to talk about their experiences with their author personas in various modes and legality. Hopefully not too illegal, but I'm sure we'll get into some of that fun and kind of give you some options for how you can present yourself out in the world, even if maybe you aren't an author, because I think a lot of what is going to be said translates. So we're going to start off with some introductions, and what I'm going to have each of the panelists do is talk about not just their name and their pronoun, but what they write and how, just in general, they approach their author brand or public presence. And just for the sake of less chaos, I'm going to call on people like we're in elementary school, and you can only talk after I say your name. So we're going to start with Stephen. Take it away.
I'm Stephen. Sorry. I'm Stephen Radecki. I am an author. I am also the managing editor of Water Dragon Publishing, and the executive producer of the podcast Small Publishing in a Big Universe. I'm here primarily to both talk about the subject, both from an author perspective, where I write mostly science fiction, and also hopefully provide some guidance from a publisher perspective of some guidance we give our authors in terms of public persona presentation. What did I leave out?
Sounded great to me.
You're good.
Oh, okay.
Find my button. Like I said, technical difficulties. Okay, next we have Joyce, working our way around.
Okay, so I write primarily science fiction. I do have some fantasy out there. I keep saying I'm going to write more fantasy, and then I get clobbered with another science fiction idea. Gosh darn it. Basically, but I write primarily science fiction with elements of contemporary Western fiction and relationships. But modern day Western is not what you think it is, and it can be very intense and very brooding, and I try to meld that with science fiction, most notably in my Assorted Martini Air Legacy series. I also try to identify very heavily with being a Pacific Northwest writer. Yay, we can see you, Jay! But I identify very heavily with being a writer from the Pacific Northwest. Right now, I am located in the inland Pacific Northwest, in the Wallowa country, Nez Perce. And my author brand is pretty much who I am as a person, and we'll probably get into that more as we talk.
All right, last but not least, we have Brandon.
Hi, I'm Brandon Crilly up here in Ottawa, Canada, where it is far warmer than it has any right to be. I'm, in addition to mostly a novelist and games writer these days, mostly fantasy, a little bit of science fiction is kind of my wheelhouse. I also wear a bunch of other hats that kind of affect my brand, social media presence, public presence. So I'm a high school teacher by day. I'm also a community organizer for CanCon, which is Ottawa's local sci-fi, fantasy, and horror con. And so both of those, over the course of my writing career, have had kind of different impacts on how I engage online and what I talk about online. I'm also in kind of the possibly unusual position for this panel in that in the last few months, I've taken a very deliberate step back from how much I'm engaging specifically with social media. So we'll probably get into that as well.
Thank you. So actually, the first question, I think we start with this because everyone kind of associates branding and persona now with social media. So I would like to kind of open up the conversation by starting off, do you use it and how you use it and why? Then I'm just going to knock it back to Brandon and we're going to go in reverse order this time.
Cool. Yeah, so like originally when I first started as a writer, this is like 10, 12 years ago now or something. Like the main reason why I was on social media was like every writer has to be on social media. You got to be on Twitter, and you got to be doing like that old thing that everybody was telling me what to do. But from a very useful standpoint, at the time, like I hardly knew any writers. Like Ottawa has this thriving writing community, but I wasn't really connected to it in any tangible way when I was first starting out because I hadn't met anybody. And so like Twitter especially was my way to connect with other writers and connect with kind of the professional community and learn from people and make connections that way. So it was incredibly useful. And so really that was my goal was connection, and then both in the like you people understand me and the all the ridiculousness that is being a writer, but also the professional connections of like this might be a path to meeting editors and agents and all that sort of stuff. But then like over time, and mostly just by virtue of going to more conventions and conferences and meeting writers in person, and eventually meeting a lot of the writers here, like my social media became more just about kind of maintaining connections with people I already knew. And then more recently has become honestly essentially like a news update sort of thing. I know a lot of writers are doing that more often. It's just it's like updates only sort of Twitter, and that's really what mine has become. But the reason why I've been able to do that is because I have all these existing connections that I can maintain independent of social media. So I kind of feel less of an impetus to constantly be on Twitter all the time. And then I do Instagram, which is kind of like weird, quirky sort of personal stuff. But even that's not about promotion. That's just about trying to post photos of my garden and my corn snake and whatever random stuff comes to mind.
So in terms of, let's say specifically what you just mentioned about Instagram and then also Twitter, do you ever think about, here's my personal things and I'm sharing this, but then I should, oh, by the way, talk about my writing? Or do you just, whatever happens, you post it and it's an extension of personal communication?
I think I used to think a lot more used to be a lot more mercenary about it in that respect. Like I would be thinking about, okay, here's this stuff that I'm like what can I talk about on either Twitter or Instagram that directly ties into my writing in a way that's like, oh, here's a nice segue to talk about this story that's out, or here's a nice and eventually that became much less fun, and felt a lot less. And then this is just for me, felt a lot less natural and kind of like not what I wanted to get out of social media. And so then I kind of started doing that less. And admittedly what little I post on social media these days is less and less to do with less and less like deliberately to do with showing aspects of my life that tie into my writing, and more just fun and occasional random thoughts that come to mind, and which I hope kind of someone else will get entertainment value out of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I was just curious because I have a book coming out, and I was just talking to like someone I know in real life today, and I feel like I've been, talking about everything that's going on, and they had no idea that I had a book coming out in a week. And I was like, this is not working in any way. What's going on here?
Well, that's the thing. I'd be curious what Stephen and Joyce think about this, but like that's the thing. Like I have no clear understanding of what any of my random posting on social media over 10 years, if any of that ever translated to anyone looking at my work at all, which I'm sure is kind of what everyone experiences. But so again, that's part of the reason why I kind of made the shift that I did. Was like, there's no way for me to mark my success at this goal, so why am I even worrying about it?
Right. That's definitely true. I think the goals is certainly really important.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Joyce, turn over to you. Do you use social media?
Well, first of all, a lot of my social media usage is shaped because I live in an extremely isolated rural area. I am 70 miles from an interstate. Yes, we have, as you may have seen in the chat, I was chatting with someone. We have a local literary conference, emphasis on literary. They're not real sure about science fiction. But for me, it's been a lot of social media has been connected with people and shared interests. I have a horse. I for me, one of the big reasons I stayed on Twitter when everything blew up, besides the fact that I also have a political background, I like to talk politics, and I know what I'm talking about. So, especially when it gets to grassroots organizing. So, I will talk about that. But horse Twitter is one of the few places I have found liberal horse people, with people with a liberal political perspective. But also, other shared interests include quilting and all sorts of other things. Um, it was a lifeline for me during the pandemic, and because I'm high risk due to age and medical stuff, I'm still isolating, I'm still masking, I'm still not going to in-person events. But the other piece too is, because I am in a very isolated rural area, we do not have a local TV station. I am in Northeastern Oregon. I do not get Portland TV. I do not get an Oregon TV station. My news comes from Spokane. Now, I finally found the station that has all of the good weather. But nonetheless, when we had a nasty, nasty hailstorm that hit last summer, fortunately not in our town, but in the lowest income town in Wallowa County, the warnings and everything came through social media, through Facebook. A lot of my local information, a lot of advertising for like garage sales or events happens on Facebook. I can't leave Facebook for that reason because there is nothing else unless I want to go on Telegram, and I don't really want to do that. So local and regional information, really, I depend on social media for that. And then again, I'm one of those extroverted introverts. I like connecting with people. And so I have umpteen writer discords. They're all writer discords too. No gaming. I'm not a gamer type person. I do Facebook, again, mostly writer and some personal. Twitter, heavy writing, heavy political. Counter Social is one that I really like. And I actually have sold work through Counter Social. I had sold work through Twitter, which was very interesting when I first started. I also didn't get on Twitter until a couple of years ago, because I had been a teacher and we had been totally like, do not go on social media, do not do this, blah 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 blah, very much discouraging because for asserted liability reasons. But right now my promotion and everything has to happen through social media because I can't do the in-person events. My spouse is over 70. He's on a medication where he can't take Paxlovid. And I love the guy, so I am not going to put him at risk. That's
Right.
basically it.
I was just thinking, is like, so I do live in a metropolitan area, but all of your examples, like where you get your news and not having other options, like I'm not actually sure I would know how to find. I know that we have them, local news and local weather, but I don't actually know. It hasn't ever occurred to me to look beyond social media because it's always worked. So I think that's a fascinating thing to realize, that we're always talking about author social media or not, but actually we do use it. I think most of us at this
Yeah,
point use it anyway.
yeah, and I mean, it really, a lot of people I do not think realize that in the U.S., especially the U.S. Inland West, for example, I was talking shortly after the whole blow up down at Malheur, the whole Malheur occupation, which most of the infot site information was coming on Facebook. But most of the information that anybody in the inland west gets, unless you live in a major metropolitan area, comes from several hundred miles away. I see someone saying, I really cannot recommend relying on social media as your only news source. When you don't have a radio station that gives you the news because they're pre-programmed, when you don't have a local television station, you have no option. When the power goes out, I have one Facebook group I go to. If something weird is happening, there's a couple of Facebook groups I go to because those are my only sources. I can, when we had the baseball sized hail hitting the little town of Wallowa, it was not covered on Spokane media. That is 200 miles away. It was not covered on Portland media. And it's not on Google. I hate to tell you this. I hate to tell anybody who says, go to Google News. And the thing is that a site like Facebook or even Twitter is going to be a lot more reliable than those places to say, oh, well, we have the news for your little local area. If you look at it, it is right wing, it is biased. If I want to know what is happening right now, I have to depend on local reports from people who are on their phones typing in that I'm seeing this happen right now. We had 3 major forest fires last year, very, very close. News.google.com did not cover it.
Hey, Joyce, I think we're getting away from the author
I'm sorry,
persona.
yeah, I'm seeing the comments there, and someone is
Well,
saying,
you can reply to that in the chat, but I think we should move on to Stephen.
Thank you. Sorry.
His goals in relationship to social media before we get too far off track here.
Well, I mean, I'll be candid. My primary goal is, of course, to sell more books, either mine or everybody's through the publishing company. So, I mean, that's really what drives most of our social media activity. Now, there's different ways that we approach that and the duration of which we do that and so forth. And I don't know if we want to go into that level of detail here, but that's really our primary goal. But to do it in such a way that it doesn't feel repetitive and boring. Like, don't do the same post every week or every day or whatever, mix it up. The other piece of advice that I give everybody, and I wish I could remember where I heard this originally, I think it was at Worldcon somewhere, but I don't remember, is people buy books, but they follow authors. So you want to, and when they follow authors, it isn't just because they want to buy the books. They're curious about who the authors are as people. Do they grow flowers? What kind of cuisine do they like? Things like that, so that they have a uh, I hesitate to call it this, but kind of a pseudo relationship. They can't be there in person and talk with them, but at least they're part of their life in this kind of detached social media way. So because of that, we frequently tell the authors, on these platforms, if there's going to be personal stuff that you want to share also, you probably want to have 2 Twitter accounts, your writer account and your personal one. Same thing with the Facebook. But there's also, we discovered some kind of demographic breakdown. We could have whole discussions about Facebook and its effectiveness, but what we have mostly discovered is the demographic there tends to be older. So if you're going to use Facebook, that's where your mostly your your older friends and your family are going to be hunting for you because they don't do Twitter, and then the younger group were out on Twitter, and so you kind of want to divide it up like that. Now, I personally, from my author persona, not my publisher persona, I have just one Twitter account because, frankly, I don't care if the whole world knows that I'm a diehard Trekkie, which is primarily the only other thing I share out there. So, if the world wants to know that, that's fine. But on Facebook, I do have a personal page and a personal account and a author page, just so that I have a better way of also segmenting what gets posted. They're not because I've got anything to hide, but just so that people don't see stuff that they don't really care about. I will insert real quickly just for historical reference. And there probably are maybe people among this group who are going like, what's that? But in terms of effectiveness, the most effective platform we actually discovered in terms of sales and getting people to attend our events was actually Google Plus. not Facebook or Twitter. Back when we were on Google Plus, that platform drew more sales and more people to our events than the other two.
That even still exists?
Just no, it's gone. But just as a data point, in terms of effectiveness. So
now a whole world of authors is sad because they can't
Yeah.
exploit the extinct media.
Yeah, exactly. But and then there's MySpace, but that was pretty.
That was a long time ago. Okay, so we've got a pretty good diversity here. So Steve has his personal things, his author things, and then also the publishing personas that he's juggling. And then both Brandon and Joyce do authentic, just their extension of their personal selves for social media. And I will just say, for diversity's sake, that I have completely cut off. I have personal accounts for social media and I have author accounts. And I wanted to mention something that Steve touched on, which is that with the algorithms now and with the way the internet is segmented, it isn't deceitful at this point. It's just a good strategy. Like if you were trying to do a business thing as a public person or wanting to become a public person, you have to make some kind of strategy about how much your personal life is going to become part of that algorithm. And if it doesn't match at all, then you really have to segment it. Okay, so we've talked about the social media part. Now I want to go through the other parts of branding, or who you are as an author in the non-internet world, or someone asks about like if you present a newsletter to the world and who that is for, basically anything like that. And we'll start with Joyce.
Uh-oh. Can't hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, what's happening is occasionally if something is muting me without me doing it. Okay, so pretty much right now, beyond social media, I'm doing newsletters because of the high risk thing. But I have 4 Substacks. One I am serializing a novel on. Another one is more of a blog presence, speculations from the wide open spaces, and it can be anything from writing to whatever. But I also, the fourth, and then there's one on politics where I post old stuff, some stuff I wrote back from the dark ages when I was a political science major. But I'm slowly integrating my newsletter on TinyLetter into a Substack newsletter, just because it's Substack's a lot easier to handle. And I send that out once a month. It's a little chatty thing. It's called Talking About Speculations. And that one is explicitly all about my writing life. But I will have a little bit like, oh, I went out wood cutting this month. We're focusing on wood cutting and harvesting morel mushrooms, and I'll put up a picture of a mushroom, or I'll put up a picture of scenery as the snow melts, because we're getting out there right after the snow melt, or things like that. Or I'll post a picture because I'll sit in my our Toyota Tundra is big enough that the passenger seat works very nicely for a little portable writer office. And so I'll have a picture of me, of my laptop, and with the scenery in the background, because it's the safest place when the husband is waving the chainsaw around. But so pretty much right now, beyond social media, that's what I'm doing, is the newsletter. And I do donate books and quilting. I mean, there's some of my quilting fabric back there. I've recently donated some books and a bag to my local Seroptimus Club with a handy little, this is what my stories are all about. I've done so. I'm a horse person, so I have, and my barn owner's daughter is shooting for Miss Rodeo America in a few years. She's worked her way up through the different levels of rodeo queendom before Miss Rodeo America. And so I have donated books and bought ads for my books, um, primarily as a means for supporting the campaign, because unlike other beauty pageants, it's not just the talent, it's the fundraising piece. And so Rodeo Queens, part of the progress towards their title is advertising, getting financial support. And so I do that. And so a little bit of community action that I can do without doing it in person is pretty much what I'm doing right now. Oh, Jay,
Oh,
you're muted.
now we can't hear Jay.
I was being so careful. Okay. Stephen, will you talk about your different roles? So your author role, outside of social media, what branding you do, conferences and
Okay.
all that, and then also what you do for the press.
Okay. So from an author perspective, I don't do nearly enough because my last book came out in 2016 and I've only published a few short pieces since then because I'm too busy publishing other people. So one of the things I tell our authors is don't look at my website as an example. It's do as I say, not as I do, or the what is the shoemaker's children. Yep, yeah. So we don't talk about my author persona much because mostly I just use it to promote other authors' books. From a publisher perspective, we do a monthly newsletter that basically here's the new titles that came out, here's what's coming, here's where people are going to be if we have a call for submissions open, and here's the latest episode of the podcast. The podcast is actually a part of our, we're treating it as an adjunct to our marketing strategy because we're opening it up to any author or artist or whatever who wants to do it. But it's kind of our way of serving the larger community. And it was mostly something I always wanted to do. So it's kind of it was again, a pandemic way of outreach. We couldn't go to places and talk. So we said, well, let's put on a show. So we created the podcast. So let's see, yeah, the monthly newsletter, and then the other thing is trying to get more involved with events like this. We've started finally doing in-person events again, which has been nice. So we drive. That actually drives a fair amount of sales for us. We've actually been doing pretty well like that because I think people like to go and meet the authors and touch the books, and since it's very difficult for small publishers and independent authors to get their books in bookstores. That's the only way that the readers can get their physical hands and on the books or at conventions and other events like that. And just trying to get out there more to participate on panels and events like this one and some of the other. We did the virtual Reader Con back in 2021, I think it was. So giving an opportunity, because we have authors, part of the issue is we have authors all over the country, and actually some of our anthology authors are all over the world. And so it's logistically difficult to be everywhere on our budget. So the more virtual venues that we can participate in benefits everybody. It benefits the authors who can participate in, and it benefits the publishing companies as a whole.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Brandon.
So I think it's a lot of what I do parallels what Joyce and Stephen have said. Like I have a newsletter that I try to do once a month, although I don't always pull that off. And kind of talking about my experience in Writerland and stuff that I hope is funny and interesting for people. A couple of projects that I've been working on over the past few years, kind of similar to what Stephen's talking about, were specifically kind of a combination of connecting with other people in the industry and also kind of tangentially promoting. So I did a podcast for 3 years. We're on a hiatus right now, called Broadcasts from the Wasteland, with another local author here, where each episode we would grab two authors who we either knew really well or people that we want to know better, and just kind of sit around and shoot the shit for a couple of hours. Talk about and really like kind of like eavesdropping, casual, in the bar sort of conversations, and the listeners just kind of like in the periphery, listening in on us. And that was very much kind of like, not that I was consciously thinking about it in terms of my author persona, but tied very much to what I like to do at in-person events, which is just chat with people as casually as possible and hang out in the bar and meet people that way. So it's kind of an extension of that. And then we kept doing it through the pandemic because we couldn't see anybody in person, so we started doing it virtually and did it that way. So it's very similar to what Stephen was talking about. And then one of the other things that I've been doing for the past 2 years now, with another author friend of mine, Mike Underwood, was we started doing a streaming series on Twitch, hosted on another friend's channel, called Bag of Giving, which is kind of a combination charity stream. We're trying to raise money for local charities by giving away books and story critiques and all sorts of stuff. And basically what we do is we bring together each month a bunch of authors to play a TTRPG one shot and just kind of have some fun and and hang around, which is an absolute blast. And part of the reason why we started doing that was just from Mike and I were on Twitter or something, I think the first year of the pandemic, talking about the fact that we would like to play more games. We'd like to play more games with our fellow writers, because the most fun that I've ever had around it, like a tabletop experience, is with other creative people, because we just go ham. And then we were like, well, screw it, let's do it. And so we started doing it virtually, and now we're just about to wrap up our second season of that, and it's been an absolute blast. And that too was not specifically about promoting my work or promoting Mike's work, or like, if anything, we were trying to promote our guests and trying to promote our charities, and and try to get back a little bit. And then if tangentially somebody's like, oh, this Brandon guy plays a good game, let's go check out his book, then that's sweet. But that wasn't really the goal. The catch with both of those, I don't know if this is useful for anybody who's watching, is that both of them are fairly large projects. That's part of the reason why the podcast is on hiatus right now. And so each of those projects, much like managing a social media account, much like managing a newsletter, requires a certain amount of energy. Like I kind of think of it as one more marble in this jar of marbles that I have, where all these projects are kind of floating around. And so it's tough. Like, the more of these you're trying to do, the more marbles in the jar, the less energy, the less time you have, or at least I find, to get words on the page, which is my ultimate goal. And so kind of what my decision-making process, project-wise, especially with the last year, has been to think, okay, as much as I love all these projects, not that I necessarily love social media, but as much as I love all the other projects, how much time do I actually have to do all these things, and how can I balance that out to make sure that I'm still, doing this right?
Yeah, the balance, I think, is always the question for creative people in general, and capitalism and everything else. All right, we are at the end of our time, so we're going to do a very fast lightning round, thus the name Lightning. And Stephen is going to start us off. Don't be scared. One thing you want people to take away from this idea of branding and an author persona. Go.
Spend time doing it. You're not going to want to. It's going to take probably more time than you want, but you got to do it. So schedule some time, at least once a week. Now, I know I've had some authors who have signed up with promotional services, and they've come back with these horrendous schedules of, oh, you need to do this every day and you need to do that. And most authors see that and just shut down. So just come up with a schedule that you can live with, but stick to it. Because if you're not up there and reminding people that you've got your books or your stories or whatever, then nobody knows about them. They're not going to buy them, right?
All right, Joyce, one takeaway. Go.
Be yourself.
Yourself.
Absolutely. Be authentic. Be yourself on social media. Don't be sell, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. Be who you really are, because that is also what attracts readers.
Alrighty, Brandon.
Don't try to manage 7 social media accounts at the same time.
Hurrah! Great idea. I do social media accounts for the WizCon Feminist Science Fiction Fantasy Convention at the end of May, so I am managing too many right now. And I have a book coming out, so I have mine on whatever 3 platforms, and then I have the WizCon, and it's just chaos. So definitely don't do that. All right, so we've got some questions as we're winding down here. If the 3 of you would please put whatever contact information or how you want people to find you on the internet in the chat, and if you're using Discord, also in the Swooperton Discord, so people can find you. Since we are talking about author branding, we should take the opportunity to say, hey, this is who I am on the internet, and you can find me here. Stephen, it looks like we have a specific question for you as an editor about how editors feel about writers' websites and if they're blogging or social media, or how those are evaluated in the publishing process.
Okay, let me finish pasting this in. We normally don't look at the websites or social media until we're ready to accept the work. Because if we tried to look at everyone that came into the slush pile, that's all we would be doing. So, but yes, once we've said, oh yeah, we want this thing, we'll do a little bit of due diligence and go, oh, do they have a Twitter account? Do they have a Facebook account? What does it look like? Do they have a website? And if it looks fine, then otherwise part of our conversation with them will be, we saw you may want to consider doing these things, or you may want to create it. As I said, you may want to create a separate Twitter account just because a lot of readers may not care about this other thing, and because. And I'm using this as an example. So, some people will post, like 10 things in a day about their breakfast, which is nice and interesting, but that's kind of a lot. And then the book stuff gets lost because they only do one post about their book.
It's also true that whatever you're posting, you're subject to the algorithm, right? So even though you're sending it out to the world, not everyone gets to see it.
Exactly.
So if they only see your breakfast and they don't see the post, like regardless of how often you post it, is kind of
exactly. I mean, I've seen that even on our own accounts, where I'll go and have to actually physically search for one of the other accounts so they can repost from it because it's not showing up because of the algorithms.
All right, next question, and this can be for anyone. It was about, do you think that it's valuable, or what value is added from paying someone to do a really fancy website as an author?
In my case, it was super valuable for me. Like, I got a author friend of mine here who does web design to redo my website. But the reason why it was super useful for me was because I don't understand, like, I don't have the knowledge to build a really effective website, and so to put the time into learning how to do it myself, again, was time that I'd have to take away from something else entirely. So for me, it made a lot of sense to hire somebody to do it. But that's just because I don't have the skill set.
I'm kind of mixed feelings. I don't get a lot of visits to my website, even to my blog. And so, although I am considering it, because I'm also considering going into doing direct sales off of my website. And so that is beyond my skill set. And I know it, and I'm not afraid to admit it, but it's just ponying up the cash. I have, and my website is, and remembering to update it, and
First, I have a curiosity for you. How did you decide to do direct sales through your website versus like using Etsy or something? We have a shop.
One of the I'm seeing a lot of people talking about it in independent publishing circles
Mhm.
because even on draft to digital, they can shut you down. They control your access to the retailers. And if they shut you down, you can't always get on direct. But also, too, it reduces it increases the amount that you get. But there's also if you're selling direct, you can do things like sell your own signed copies
Right.
and that sort of thing. So I'm looking at it. I haven't made the jump yet because there needs to be the management of sales taxes. There
Right.
needs to be a management, and so I'm considering looking at things like Shopify.
Mm.
Etsy is problematic right now and I'm hearing that from other people. I also do quilt crafting, and I want to be able to incorporate my fabric art stuff with my books. And I think it'd be better just done off my own site.
If you
Yeah.
use Square for your credit card processing, they've got a adequate way to do a storefront. It's not everything and a bag of chips, but it's enough to get you started until you can integrate it into your own website.
Mm-hmm.
I've thought about that, and I did before the pandemic. I had actually started using a Square account, but I didn't, because I heard people talk about Stripe. I'll have to check out Square.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. We have just a few minutes left.
I did answer in the chat just a few minutes ago, but we do recommend that our authors create at least a base website to use as their hub, just because underneath all the social media stuff kind of, moves and other things move and other people, just so they have one place they can point people. To find out more about me, go here, and then there it's got all the links to your social media or whatever, just because things change so fast and you're not having to update multiple things. I know a number of, I don't know if she's on here, a number of the authors are also big into Linktree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got one of those.
Will
As
you
a means for
explain
that as well.
Linktree for those of us who don't know about it? Or beacons?
From the way that Brian is nodding, he can probably explain it better than I do.
Brandon?
Yeah,
Brandon, sorry.
Oh no. Yeah, so Linktree is essentially just a website or web service where it's a single link that will bring whoever clicks on it to a page with like a whole bunch of other links to your various things. So mine brings people to it's like a list of buttons, so it's visually appealing, which is nice, and it's got you can put kind of whatever you want in there. So mine has my website, it has Bag of Giving, it has some direct links to where to purchase my novel, and you can kind of curate what it is. So it's basically, instead of having to worry about, I'm going to post all these links, you just post one, and it's kind of one-stop shopping for links. Sort of like having a website, but just, as a link.
Yeah, I've been told I need to do that one. I see in the chat people are mentioning book funnel integration for direct sales. Yes, that would be how you would handle doing direct ebook sales off of your because then you don't have to worry about giving instructions about side loading.
Right.
Book funnel staff is very good at integrating all of that. And so if you are independent, I really recommend using book funnel. It costs, but I think it's worth it.
Corollary to that, somebody could make a fortune if they could figure out an effective way to sell ebooks at conventions.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. I mean, we do, one of the things that NIWA does, Northwest Independent Writers, is that we have book tables at assorted events up and down the Willamette Valley and holiday events, but there are things like the Robin Hood Festival, the various outdoor arts festivals in the summer. And we kind of have a system where when you sign up, you give a tagline, but it's not perfect and not everything sells. We're still, and what worked pre-pandemic does not work post-pandemic.
Yes.
Is what that's what we and that is what we have been kind of wrestling with. Also, not all genres work very well at these broad events.
Mhm.
One of the things that really I think does push things is if you have a very localized, if you're selling at local events, if you're selling at things like farmers markets, if you have a local connection to what you're selling, to your books, even
Mhm.
if it's science fiction or fantasy, then you're better at doing it. But we're still, because what works one year, one event,
Yeah.
we can go to the same event, same people,
Mhm.
and it's totally a totally different experience.
Mhm.
That's what being a writer is all about, right? Creativity,
Don't scare them.
creativity,
Don't scare them.
marketing. All right, we are out of time. Thank you all for being here. It was lovely to see you virtually. For those of you still with us, I would just like to say that if you are interested in exploring more about social media, I have a 2-hour workshop tomorrow where we kind of talk about some of the things touched on here, but mostly how to set goals and not kill yourself and figure out how social media can work for you.